which sits around 75 kilometers or 45 miles west of Atlanta. Now, Georgia is often regarded as part of the Deep South and home to more than 11 million people. Historically, the state thrived on agriculture. However, in more recent decades, huge companies like Coca-Cola, Delta Airlines, and Home Depot have all set up their headquarters in Atlanta. This, of course, brings much-needed wealth into the region. And, sadly, with wealth inevitably comes greed. From the 1980s right through to the early 2000s, Atlanta consistently ranked among the top 5 most crime-ridden cities in the entire United States. Now, thankfully, the years have followed, a massive investment would actually lead to a huge turnaround. And by the year 2015, Atlanta had slipped all the way down to 19th place on that list, which sounds like great progress. However, when you turn the lens onto homicides, the story unfortunately changes quite dramatically. In fact, over the past 15 years alone, Atlanta's homicide rate has almost tripled. So, while murder is still relatively quite rare here, when police received a phone call at 7:15 in the morning on February 20th, 2025, they quite naturally took it very seriously. The voice on the other end of the line was a young girl who was only barely able to form her words through tears, desperately trying to describe what was going on inside her family's home. The caller was 16-year-old Sarah Patrick, and it turns out that only moments earlier, her 5-year-old sister Jamie had run to her bedroom after making a horrifying discovery. And that's because, after waking up just a little bit earlier, she had walked into her parents' bedroom to find both of them lying unresponsive in their bed. When officers arrived, they took both Sarah and Jaylee, who were now in great distress, away for professional care. Meanwhile, police stepped inside to investigate. Now, at first glance, nothing seemed out of place. In fact, the entire home seemed to be spotless. And not only were there no signs of forced entry, but nothing seemed to be damaged either. But by the time officers reached upstairs, well, that painted Zola. And although the children's bedrooms were tidy, the master bedroom held some very dark secrets. After stepping through the doorway and then peering through quite rarely, when police received a phone call at 7:15 in the morning on February 20th, 2025, they quite naturally took it very seriously. The voice on the other end of the line was a young girl who was only barely able to form her words through tears, desperately trying to describe what was going on inside her family's home. The caller was 16-year-old Sarah Patrick, and it turns out that only moments earlier, her 5-year-old sister Jamie had run to her bedroom after making a horrifying discovery, and that's because, after waking up just a little bit earlier, she had walked into her parents' bedroom to find both of them lying unresponsive in their bed. When officers arrived, they took both Sarah and Jaylee, who were now in great distress, away for professional care. Meanwhile, police stepped inside to investigate. Now, at first glance, nothing seemed out of place. In fact, the entire home seemed to be spotless. Not only were there no signs of forced entry, but nothing seemed to be damaged either. But by the time officers reached upstairs, well, that painted a very different picture. And although the children's bedrooms were tidy, the master bedroom held some very dark secrets. After stepping through the doorway and then peering into the bed, officers found both Kristen and James cold to the touch. And although at first glance it looked as if they were really just sleeping, that is when they looked closer. The pillows and bedsheets were just covered in blood, and both adults seemed to have injuries with what appeared to be multiple gunshot wounds. Now, what is quite interesting here is that police were almost immediately able to determine that, due to the angles of the projectiles, these injuries were not self-inflicted. This of course meaning that neither of the two were responsible for either of their deaths. Unfortunately, both Kristen and James were pronounced dead at the scene, and officers were also able to determine that, due to the state of their bodies, they had likely died a few hours prior, well before the girls woke up from their sleep. Oh, and just a quick side note here for clarity, but the son was actually away from the family that night, meaning there were only 4 people in the property at the time. And now, with 3 newly orphaned children and 2 adults murdered in their own bed, police now have the grim task of trying to figure out what precisely happened. After taking an initial look at the crime scene, detectives realized that the house itself told a very curious story. Every room, apart from the master bedroom, was immaculate as always. The home was clean, tidy, and nothing appeared to be out of place. And not only were there no signs of a struggle or any forced entry, but nothing from the property had been stolen either. With this in mind, it basically ruled out any sort of possibility of a robbery going on. And while that scenario was the truth upstairs, only to murderous happen before then failing to answer the house. None of this made any sense to police officers. And to be honest, detectives now believe that whoever pulled the trigger that night had the sole intention to murder both Kristen and James. But to make matters even more confusing, another crucial detail quickly became apparent. No murder weapon was ever found at the crime scene, which only made the investigation even more difficult to solve. As you can see here from Google Maps, the Nolan family lived in a rural and heavily built area. Their neighbors were
Nee!
In the days that followed, police combed the property, searching for the faintest trace of forensic evidence. Meanwhile, the extended family announced a $5,000 reward for anyone with any information that could help lead to an arrest. But before we go any further in this story, it is worth asking, who precisely were the Nolan family? Did the family have any enemies? And if not, were they targeted by anyone? Well, to begin with, the family included both parents, Kristen and James Brock, and their 3 children, including 16-year-old Sarah Grace Patrick, her younger brother Donnie, and her younger sister, 5-year-old Jayla. Together, they lived on a rural property in Hamilton, Georgia, surrounded by many fields and trees, and a beautiful stretch of land. To make things just a little more complicated, Sarah and Donnie were from Kristen's first marriage to Donald Patrick. The turbulent relationship had sadly ended in divorce in July 2018, and as is often the case, custody would soon become the central battle between the two. Although both parents would fight for full rights, the court ultimately ruled for joint custody, with Kristen holding primary care, while Daniel was unfortunately left without the work deal. Sadly, he was only allowed to see them on alternate weekends and holidays, a decision that would leave him with only fleeting time with his children. It was still matters that Kristen met James Brock. A European romance followed, with both of them quickly falling in love and moving in together. And naturally, James stepped up into the role of stepfather, and thankfully, he did seem to be good at it too. And when Kristen and James also welcomed their daughter Jamie to the family, it finally felt complete. Moving forward, the Brocks became a familiar face of the community, with thanks for attending Carlton's atletisch while James was the natural joke with the group, Kristen was both bodily real and nurturing, and from local news reports, it looks like that her children were well liked by neighbours and the community too. So, as you can see, on the surface, the Nolans look like a happy, faith-driven family from the deep south. But in truth, the reality was actually far more complicated. It turns out that James and Kristen were both former addicts, with things getting so bad at one point that they both got in trouble with the law. Kristen had struggled with a serious drug problem, which actually was one of the biggest reasons behind his fight with Daniel. Side note, but it's also the main reason why he fought for custody. And while little is known about Daniel himself, it isn't difficult to understand his concern. He believes that Kristen's drug use posed a real risk to both Sarah and Donnie's upbringing. And it turns out that court documents would also reveal that James Brock battled with the very same demons. However, this was not the same story that the Patrick family shared. They claimed that they remained faith.
Yes! Op minus! De vrij!
Laten we deze treffer nog eens bestuderen. Want wat gebeurt er nou allemaal? The thing is that Daniel was not actually convinced himself, and he believed that Kristen and James were putting on this facade simply to try to keep social services away. He was quite terrified actually, because his version of reality was very different, and he believed that his children were frequently exposed to both meth and weed in the when his son Donny showed up with a mark on his body and claimed that James had hit him with a belt, well, that was the breaking point for him. No surprise, he went to social services the very same day and demanded that they revisit the case. It was only 2 days before Christmas in 2019 that he filed an emergency motion. In this document, he claimed that not only did both of his children look neglected, but they were also behind on medical and dental care. And the thing is that he was not the only one who was sounding the alarm, because even his daughter, Sarah, who was only 11 years old at the time, wrote in her own statement that she preferred to live with her father. Sarah would also later tell her teacher that she was actually afraid to go home. Worried for her safety, the police then became involved, and she would tell them the exact same thing. In fact, she would even describe to them the drug packaging that she found around her house, and even the smell of black. I mean, doing drugs as a parent is bad enough, but doing them in front of your own kids is a whole new level of neglect and cruelty. Sarah obviously knew that something was wrong, but her younger brother and sister were far too young to understand, especially Jamie. So, in a way, it was kind of up to her to sound the alarm to teachers and officers. It really shouldn't be that way, but nobody else was going to do it. Now, unfortunately, the courts did not grant Donny full custody, but his emergency filing did seem to win him some time, that being sentimental custody of 4 days over Christmas. And as more of their history came to light, things seemed to make
Keep up! No, man! Goeie man, Amazon!
And then sentenced to probation, where he then violated it a year later with a string of other charges, including shoplifting, stolen property, weed possession, and obstructing an officer. That little crime spree would earn him even more probation and jail time. And obviously, it was hardly the picture of a dependable stepfather. The evidence against Kristen and James was clearly stacking up, and by October of 2020, the courts had finally changed their arrangements. From that point onwards, both Sarah and Donny would their fathers on the weekends, and only see Kristen on certain weekends. And it wasn't full custody, but for Donny, it was a big step in the right direction. That being, in his mind, giving his children a safer and more stable home. However, the custody fight was not the end of their issues, because in December 2022, tragedy struck Kristen and James yet again, but in a very different way. Sadly, James had suddenly suffered a massive heart attack, and doctors also realized that he was now in advanced heart failure. They also claimed that if he didn't have surgery immediately, he wouldn't survive. Now, thankfully, he would survive, but that was
Cristiano Ronaldo.
which is basically a mechanical pump that puts pump flow from the body. Now, you don't have to trust me with this, but all of this ties back into the investigation. The long story short is that James's pump had a monitor that he would carry around with him at all times of the day. If anything was out of rhythm with his heart, it would play an extremely loud alarm. And let's just say that those events
Yes!
Now, despite all of their past struggles,
The big boss.
things did to be improving for both Kristen and James. I mean, even the once bitter relationship between Kristen and Donny had now started to mellow out. Believe it or not, all 3 parents were even seen together at some of the kids' events, sitting down in the same room without any issue, and even chatting casually. So, with everything going so well for the family, what happened on the night that 2 of them were murdered? On the surface, Kristen and James didn't seem to have any enemies whatsoever, at least not in recent years. So, unless some ghost from their drug-fueled past came back to haunt them, then it was kind of hard to imagine anyone wanting to wish them harm. But behind the polished family image, cracks were slowly forming. For example, maybe Kristen and James were now each other's worst enemies. It is known that around a year before their wedding in 2022, things did take a dark turn when James actually petitioned the court for a protective order against his very own fiancée. James claimed that he feared for his and his daughter's safety. It was during one explosive argument that apparently Kristen got into the family car with Jaylee and Donny still inside, and then tried to run him over while he was stood in the bar. He also claimed that apparently Kristen had been hitting him regularly, destroying property, and even threatening to kill him. He also suspected that she had swapped hard drugs for prescription abuse. However, here is the strange part. James would later decide to drop every allegation, and so the protective order against his fiancée never went through, and within months they went ahead and even married in December of 2023. So, did Kristen change for the better, or did James just simply bury it all for the sake of the family? Even more curiously, did this have anything to do with their deaths, or is it simply just another tragic backstory? Well, what we do know based off of the bullet's trajectories is that neither of the two were responsible. The evidence proved that neither Christian or James turned the gun on themselves and then each other, which of course means that somebody else is responsible. But who? And why? Unfortunately, the crime scene offered no answers either. There was no DNA, no fingerprints, no sign of forced entry, and both of their exes were accounted for that night. So, with nothing pointing to an outsider, officers were now forced to turn their gaze inwards to only other people in the home. I can't believe we're talking about kids here, but Gotti was with his father that night, which of course meant there was only two other people. There was young Jaylee and 16-year-old Sarah, and when investigators looked closer, they realized that Sarah's story did not seem to add up.
Hallo.
As days turned into weeks with no rest whatsoever, the community rallied together around these three children. However, things were happening in the background, and in public, especially with, the true crime community, people started to look closer into the case. Let's just say that things were not quite adding up for Sarah. Like many other children her age, Sarah was chronicling and basically had profiles absolutely everywhere. She was on Instagram, on Facebook, but her favourite platform by far was TikTok. And let's just say that in the weeks following her parents' marriages, she would begin to post a lot of things on that platform. Now, to be fair to her, there is no rule book for how to post this street. You would do that very differently, and I can imagine that losing your parents this suddenly would be absolutely awful. However, given the circumstances, some of Sarah's online activity would be classed as
Zo lang is hij nog niet gespeeld, hoor.
It wasn't long before viewers and even some members of the own family started to raise questions. Now, before we look at TikTok, let's rewind to her first Facebook. Since Sarah's phone had been taken by police as evidence, she actually wrote this message only 4 days after the murders. In this post, she described being woken up by her sister screaming and then discovering her parents after they had been shot. She also claimed that some of the details in the news were not actually her fault, although she didn't specify which parts. She also wrote that she was praying that she would hold her parents and thanked her church for keeping her family in their lives. A few weeks later,
Yes! Isaac!
Werkelijk geweldig ingeschoten. Daar doe je niet veel aan. En het staat weer gelijk, 1 tegen 1.
And you can see that towards the end, and while still crying, she briefly said, "I'm sorry."
Kobashi. Bina.
What she meant by that apology is not clear. Perhaps she felt embarrassed for breaking down in front of everyone. Or maybe it was something deeper. Whatever the reason, it did seem to stick in people's minds. And trust me, it would come back later, as questions about Sarah would only grow louder. In the weeks that followed, Sarah would continue to post on social media, but mostly on TikTok. By mid-March, TikTok is where she would be sharing her updates, and the intent to increase her following asked them to follow her level. Now, by the time that I'm telling you this story, her TikTok account has been completely wiped, probably only a first but the thing is that the internet never forgets, and enough of the videos were later saved and then re-uploaded. And let's just say that it no longer looks right for Sarah. In one video, Sarah filmed herself in tears with mascara streaking down her face. The clip is paired with a trending sound, and over it she had written, "They don't know it, but a year from now, me and my 5-year-old sister are finding a work and they won't get to see me graduate, walk down the aisle, or even say goodbye." The video then shifted to a slideshow of happy family photos. But what really struck people as odd was that the video opened with a photo of Sarah all dressed up as if she were having a party before then proceeding to the memorial images. Many viewers felt it was both jarring and tone deaf, which, to be honest, yeah, it is. I think we're all tired of seeing insecure people crawl for validation. In another video, Sarah claimed that she felt crushing girls, saying, "I can't help but hate myself because I didn't wake up before my 5-year-old sister had to find me in the house." And in another, she said, "It hits me when I hear her screaming for her mum times. These were raw and representations, and the kind of pain you would expect from a traumatized teen." But seeing it broadcasted to the world like this only fueled the split reaction, with sympathy being felt on one side and suspicion on the other. But Sarah was not merely posting on her account either, because by June of 2025, and only a few months after the murders, she had even contacted a TikTok true crime creator named Angie, apparently, specifically asking them to cover her parents' face. And this is where it gets even more suspicious, because Sarah would describe her parents' murders as, quote, a big hit, and even offered, quote, insider intel. Now, the creator did end up making a video about this, Sarah was seen interacting with comments. Again, this would fuel a whole bunch of mixed reactions, because some would see this as her trying to keep pace in the spotlight, but others believe that this man basically forced her to spectacle. Either way, Sarah's social media left many people divided. And so, on that note, what do you think at this stage? Was she a grieving teenager, desperately seeking justice? Or was there something else entirely? One thing was certain here, that Sarah absolutely adored her, and knowing every post circled back to how much she missed Kristen. For many weeks, her grief was raw and relatable, but by early summer, the tone did seem to begin to shift. What once looked like a daughter's heartbreak now started to feel performative, and one of the main questions that many people asked when they looked at Sarah was wondering if she was simply grieving, or if she was now enjoying the attention that tragedy had brought. And it wasn't just the internet that was asking that question either, because by now, even law enforcement had started to quietly scrutinize her.
Gusto.
And then came July of 2025, when all of a sudden the case was flipped on its head. Despite numerous months of hard work, detectives had no evidence to suggest any attack coming from the outside. And so, with that in mind, they now had to question the unthinkable, of course that being, were they perhaps murdered from someone on the inside of the property? So, out of the family of 5, who could potentially be responsible here? Well, to begin with, there's James and Kristen, but they were the 2 that were actually murdered, so definitely not them. Next, there was Donald, but he was out of the property all night. And then there was Jaylee, but she was 5 years old at the time. And that only leaves one person remaining. Of course, the one who called emergency services, the one who apparently slept through the gunfire, and James's alarm.
Bitch ass nigga.
Potentially has the motive and opportunity.
Je zou kunnen zeggen dat dit een
And of course,
schoolvoorbeeld
we're
is
talking
van
about
een
Sarah.
geslaagde
By
counter.
early July, detectives
De
believed that
omschakeling,
they had enough to incriminate
de
Sarah,
afgemeten,
so they issued a
ja,
warrant.
was een
And by
fantastische
July 9th,
paas.
she was officially
Alles
issued
goed.
police
En dan is het
custody.
om af te rekenen met de keeper. En die doet dat heel kundig met een hard geplaatst schot. Ja, dat kun je deze speler wel overlaten.
However, investigators themselves were confident in their theory, and so, later that day, the sheriff's office announced their arrest. They claimed that there were mountains of evidence available, backed by interviews with the FBI. Because this is still an active case, police have not shared much of what they actually have on Sarah yet. And so, for now, we're left piecing things together from the little that we do actually know. But let's just say that, even in this limited position, many details simply don't sit right. First off, let's talk about the front door. Not only do investigators state that there was no forced entry, but everything seemed to be intact. The only odd thing was that one of the doors was actually left ajar that morning, which of course could mean it was staged to suggest a break-in, or also it could just simply be how the family lived. It is true that they resided in a safe neighborhood with pets, and so leaving a door unlocked overnight was not unthinkable. But when you pair that with 0 foreign fingerprints or any DNA whatsoever, and the mystery intruder theory suddenly looks quite flimsy. And then there was the crime scene itself. The house was spotless, nothing was stolen or disturbed, and whoever did this seemingly went straight upstairs, shot 2 people multiple times, and then just simply walked out. Apparently, that's not your average burglary gone wrong here. Whoever had murdered them, well, it was personal. And finally, let's look at Sarah's story. She told the police that apparently she went to bed around midnight, not even saying goodnight to her mother or stepdad, which her relatives claim was
Madison
unusual.
heeft de
She
bal
also
en
told
is op weg
bosses
naar de
that she
16.
slept throughout the entire thing. Of course, that means that she
Een
would
sluwe
have slept through
steekpaas.
all of the commotion and even the
De bal
gunshots.
terug.
Only
En de
woke
aanval
up
loopt
when her younger
spaak.
sister Jaylee
Nu
came crying
zouden ze
in
best
the
kunnen
morning.
counteren.
However, here is where it
Het leek
starts
een
to
goede
unravel,
uitbraak, maar
because on
jammer
social
van het
media,
balverlies.
Sarah actually said something different. In one of her videos on TikTok, she actually claimed that she had in fact heard her
balletje.
dad starting alarm around 20 minutes after going to bed. Now,
Hij
apparently, it was so
pakken.
loud that she could
Bitch ass nigga.
The video suggests that
om in
even
het
if
doel
she
te
wasn't
verdwijnen.
responsible
De
for
verdediger
the murders,
totaal
she was still awake
onvoorzichtig,
while
dus
all of this was
die
going on,
actie was
which
gewoon perfect
included the
uitgevoerd.
gunshots.
En die kans
So,
wordt
not
van
only do we
dichtbij
have two
afgerond.
conflicting stories from
Mooi.
Sarah, but also one of them makes no sense whatsoever.
Gaat het
She was back
erom
to hear the
spannen.
alarm, the
3-2.
gunshots, all this commotion that soon included coming up the stairs and into her parents' bedroom.
Zo,
And
die
to
heeft
make this
vanmorgen
more
weer de wandelschoenen
clear,
gepoetst.
and
Heeft
also,
open naar
her
de
sister
andere
Jaylee
kant van het
claimed
veld.
that she heard those gunshots in the middle of the
Net op
night.
tijd ertussen.
Apparently, they were distinct loud booms. Of course, if Sarah would have heard that, she would have likely jumped out of bed
James
to
Madison.
investigate. However, in her police interview, Sarah claims that she heard
steekpaas van
absolutely
Fernandes.
nothing at all, which of course
Wie de
I
bal
think is a
terug in het
huge
spel.
flaw in her credibility. So, the investigators were now
blijven.
left with a
Een
new
oplossing.
alibi.
Zo
The
dus.
door left ajar. No sign of
Nou,
evidence of a
overigens
break-in
hoeft
or
deze
anyone
keeper niet te
coming from the
klagen, hoor.
outside. And a teenager
Bal
whose
niet op
story
zo'n manier
keeps
komt, dan
shifting. I have to
sta
say,
je met
I'm not
2-8.
good for Sarah,
Dan heb
is
je
it?
een groot probleem.
By
En
now,
veilig
it wasn't
weggewerkt.
just the internet or the
Lijkt me wel
police who
handig
were grown
om deze
suspicious of
situatie zo
Sarah,
op te
but her
lossen.
very own family.
Raakt
The
de
most
bal
notable
kwijt na
about
die
it
tackle.
was James's niece,
Mooie
Kristen
afstandsschot.
Brown.
Strak
Not
geschoten.
only had she
Ja,
been
markeert
close to
weinig
her
aan.
uncle, but
Ja,
she had
het enige
also
wat er nog
known
een keertje is
Sarah
een beetje
ever
geluk.
since she was
Zeker
little.
van
She had
zo'n
always
afstand.
adored her. Of course, that was only until the arrest, and after that, Kristen did not hold back. When she herself began to grow doubtful, she
Madison.
posted Sarah's eulogy on Facebook with a brutal
Paas
caption,
op paas.
saying, "After their funeral, I when I saw someone who recorded this,
Bal
I
van de
immediately
slot.
said,
Bullshit,
Oh,
man.
heerlijk gedaan.
one
Wat
day,
een doelpunt.
everyone will see
Het
it
verschil
for
is nu
what it
2.
was." We sat there at the service thinking, am I actually watching a case of murder case?
Het begint natuurlijk allemaal met een efficiënte actie. Niets op af te dingen. En dan is het nog niet zo makkelijk, want de rest gaat niet vanzelf. Maar hoe hier wordt afgerekend met de oppositie en hoe de bal in het doel belandt.
And luckily in this case, that monster gets to trade her
Dat is wel
dress
een mooie
for
steekpaas.
jumpsuit and hers.
Daar gaat
Kristen
de
is
bal bezitten.
convinced that something is off about
Ja, nu
Sarah.
kan er een
And
counter
it wasn't
komen.
just the family who thought the eulogy was odd either, because even detectives noted the same thing. In fact, law enforcement even saved a copy of the funeral live stream as evidence.
Koubachi.
They also believe that Sarah's public display was less about grief and more about
Rodri
controlling
raakt hier de bal
suspicion.
kwijt.
But remember, at this point, most of the evidence still remains a secret. Prosecutors say that they're holding back the full
Netjes
picture of the
gegeven.
trial, but insist that the case is strong.
Bij die
I mean,
bal
they
komen om weg
wouldn't
te
charge a
werken.
17-year-old with double homicide on mere speculation alone. But curiously enough, they've also said that further arrests are maybe possible. When Sarah turned herself in, she was hit with 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of aggravated assault. And because of the severity of this case, the state plans to try her as an adult. This means that, if she is convicted, she'll face life behind bars. After Sarah's arrest, even the true crime community weighed in. That is when allegedly, reportedly, also revealed that Sarah herself
Dan hoor je de
was
schouder
to
van
cover
het
her
aanvang,
parents'
dames en heren.
murders.
Aanvang, dames en heren, want er is weer een wedstrijd. Daar is de stand. Nog maar 1 doelpunt. Korea. Mariona. Einde balbezit. Schiet. Heerlijk gekiept op de corner komt voor. Altijd lekker. Opwarm balletje. Vind je vast. Korea. Bruno Fernandes.
It was clear that TikTok had become Sarah's outlet for grief, but whether
Sterke
that
actie.
grief was real or staged, that's still up for debate. Her quick jump onto trending sounds and dramatic posts had left many wondering if she was actually
Bruno
chasing
Fernandes.
sympathy or simply chasing
Maar
views.
er komt hulp aan.
However, while most of the internet has
raakt de bal
back on
kwijt.
Sarah,
Ja,
she still
kans
does
voorbij.
have several loyal supporters. Of course, the biggest one being her own father, Daniel. who claims that she is absolutely innocent. As of the time making this video, he still hosts fundraisers, posts interviews, and basically says the same thing over and over again. That Sarah is a sweet and gentle and kind-hearted girl. There was no way that she could be responsible for this. I'm not surprised, given the state this world is in, but there is even a Facebook group that seeks to defend Sarah, which, at this point in time, has already gained over 1,000 members. Even still, alongside that support, even darker rumors are circulating online. Several of the fans on TikTok claim that Sarah had previously been hospitalized for mental health reasons, though so far, none of them have been confirmed. And, let's be honest here, literally nothing on TikTok can be taken seriously. Despite her apparent involvement, no real motive has emerged so far. And now, Sarah is sitting in jail. Her bond hearing is on August 19th of this year, where she asked to be released on local trial until trial. But thankfully, that motion was denied.
Motion for bond. The defense has a burden of coming forward initially with evidence to show that the defendant is not proposing to make a person committing another crime or intimidate a witness. And then it is the state has the burden of persuasion in convincing this court that the defendant is not entitled to be released.
Waar die kon je bomen aan was wel.
Een hat-trick.
Voor de tegenstander het echt door had, was hij al buiten bereik en kon hij die kans benutten.
Uitstekend gezien hoor, prima interceptie. Zoveel ruimte moet je Cristiano Ronaldo niet geven. En dat is de aansluitingstreffer. Net voor tijd wordt het toch nog spannend.
Ja, dat mag je wel zeggen. Er zijn nog geen mogelijkheden. Hè?
Martin Ødegaard. De bal is hij kwijt naar die tackle. Mohamed Salah.
As a result, she will remain behind bars at least until the end of her trial, which could be months long or maybe even years. That all depends on how strong the evidence really is.
Hele fraaie steekpas hier.
Hopefully, as time goes on, more light will be shed on this case, and you can absolutely bet that whenever we find more updates in the future. We will be keeping a close eye on this one. We're probably losing sleep on it too. Unfortunately, we are ending this video on a rather overlooked cliffhanger. But of course, all the evidence so far does seem to suggest that Sarah is responsible
De reactie van het publiek is duidelijk.
There's
Ze
a lot to
vinden
chew on,
dat we
and honestly,
hier een
I've seen so
strafschop
many
kunnen
theories and opinions that...
Kom op man, bij die koeien zo.
Do you think Sarah is responsible for her parents' murders? Or do you think she was unfortunately pregnant? As always, please share your own thoughts in the comment section down below, and I'll try to read as many as I can. And hey, if you haven't subscribed yet and you're not part of the Coffee House Crime community, then please do consider doing so. It really does help the channel out. Alternatively, if you want to do something a little more casual, please find me on Instagram. I mean, just saying, if you want to see more of Nero, that is definitely the place to go. Anyway, folks, with that said, thank you so much for watching, and I really appreciate you making it to the end.
Een klein beetje wel, hè? Nina.
I'll see you again very soon for another video, probably in 4 or 5 days, we'll see. Until that moment arrives though, remember to look after yourselves, look after each other, and of course, stay safe and stay curious. Thank you, and goodbye.
Ja, een klein beetje wel, ja.
Kan het ook niet helpen. Nee, ik ben geen QC.
Welcome to Coffee House Crime Times. My name is Adrian.
Was ik maar op die manier. Hoe is het met Nina dan? Ik weet niet als je me goed hoort hoor, want die microfoon die kraakt een beetje. Of ja, een beetje, heel erg. Maar ik kan even niet tegen mijn verlies, dus ik ga even naar een andere game switchen. Als je wilt zie ik jullie zo. Want ik ga even die COD spelen. We gaan even die zombies killen, je weet. Dag. En zo naar jou, Nina. But I'm out. Of ja, ik kom sowieso wel terug zometeen.